The Go Downs is back with the NFL trades that are most likely to happen, in my opinion. And some of these trades could really happen at any given second. We'll talk about specific scenarios for these players. Let's get to it. Greg Newsome, young corner of the Cleveland Browns, has 1 year left on his deal. It's actually that 5th-year option from his rookie deal. Then he'll need a new extension, new deal. So we'll see if that's from the Browns or it's from a different team now or in free agency. But there's been rumors for Greg Newsome being traded for over a year, it feels like. But right before the draft, it came out that teams felt that Newsome was available. And then you kind of look at what the Browns have done. It feels like they're somewhere in the rebuild stages. They're looking out for their long-term future. So it could make sense to trade a guy on an expiring deal and get a little something for him right now. They could let him walk in free agency and get a future compensatory pick. Or he's young. He has upside. He could be part of the rebuild. They would just have to extend him. But it would make some sense. You know, I know he plays alongside Ward and Emerson, but they like those guys better. But Newsome does play in the slot a bit. But it could be a guy they look to trade, and there's been some rumors about it. I look at the Seattle Seahawks. They make a lot of sense. They're looking for another corner. They've taken a look at some free agents, including Rasul Douglas, maybe Asante Samuel Jr., but they could turn to trading for a young guy that could be part of the future here. And why it makes even more sense is, well, they have Tariq Woolen for the outside, right? And then Witherspoon actually plays, and that's their best corner. He plays outside and inside, close to 50-50, maybe a little bit more on the outside. But Greg Newsome plays both as well, a little bit more in the slot. So those guys kind of pair together pretty damn well. Just feels like a Mike McDonald guy, very experienced in man coverage. Obviously, Mike McDonald likes to run a lot of zone, but he mixes it up a bit. And then Newsome has some upside in that category. So compensation's a little tricky because expiring deal, you're going to either be a rental or you're going to need to give him an extension. He needs to fully put it together. He has durability concerns, but he's young with upside. The Browns don't absolutely have to trade him. It's not one of those situations. I originally was thinking like a lone 5th-round pick. It just doesn't seem worth it to the Browns. Get a 4th-round pick, but that does seem like a little rich for a guy that has durability concerns. He's an extension. So a little bit of a pick swap here, but a big jump up for Cleveland getting a 4th-round pick, and the Seahawks get a young corner in Greg Newsome, and they'll probably decide at some point this year if they want to extend him, and they get a 6th-round pick as well. But a guy that has been talked about in terms of trade rumors for some time, does it finally happen? We'll see. Another corner, and Jamel Dean's a guy we've touched on a little bit in somewhat recent trade videos, but since then, the Buccaneers drafted Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame and Jacob Parrish from Kansas State. I love those prospects. Those are legit young corners, and they get added to a corner room that includes a potential future star in Zion McCollum. So they're looking a lot better in terms of corner. There was some rumors about the Bucs moving on from Jamel Dean earlier in the offseason. Now that they could do that, they're not desperate to keep Dean. They can free space this year and next year because he has 2 years left on his deal, and they can get something for him. And I look at the Raiders. Obviously, there's a connection there with the Raiders and with Spy Tech in their front office. They badly need a corner. I mean, they could use more than one. I know they drafted Darian Porter. He could end up being solid for them. Feels like a high upside guy because he has the traits you look for. But they need somebody in there now, and a smart veteran guy that's very experienced, obviously, would make some sense. So, and he'd be a little cheaper in terms of compensation than what his actual talent is because the Buccaneers don't really need Dean anymore. They would actually free a bit of space this year and next year. And, he wouldn't be super expensive for a team like the Raiders, but it would make sense for the compensation to be a little lower than what his value is, his skill set, I should say, is at. So I thought a 5th-round pick made some sense. Again, the Raiders very desperate for a corner. Get him in. You have him for 2 years. He can kind of teach the young guys that they have. They need a veteran, solid presence in there. They can get it with Jamel Dean. But I could see teams like the Eagles, the Rams, the Seahawks, Panthers for a guy like Jamel Dean. There could be several teams interested. Not really hearing his name pop a bunch right now, but I do think it makes a lot of sense. The Buccaneers can free money. They can play the young guys. The Raiders get better at corner. Speaking of the Raiders, whatever happened to the Michael Mayer trade discussions? I mean, those were big. They were serious. They were a bit before the draft. A couple months ago, it felt like a trade was going to happen, but I'm assuming teams kind of wanted to wait and see what they got in the draft. Now that we're past that point, I think a deal could happen. Of course, the Raiders could keep Mayer. He's still young as upside when they actually gave him a shot. He looked pretty decent. You could still pair him with Bauer, so they very well could keep him. They're not desperate to trade him. He's very, very cheap. And then what's the compensation as well? That could be a little tricky. But the Patriots aren't desperate for a tight end. They have a couple good veterans. They have Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper. But they could use another guy. And here's a younger guy with upside, and he has that Josh McDaniels connection, so it makes sense. I have a feeling that offense will use tight ends quite a bit. So they could use the rotation. They could use the guy for the future here. So 4th-round pick felt a little rich, even though you deep down, you really think Michael Mayer still, you think he has to have some big-time upside. I mean, this was a star tight end in college, and that was only a couple years ago, right? But didn't play much last year, a little bit of an off-the-field thing. Not that he's in trouble or anything, but yeah, some interesting situation there. So I thought a 5th-round pick, 7th-round pick going to the Patriots. Cheap tight end option. I still think a trade with Mayer could definitely happen. It seemed pretty serious a couple months ago. A Jermaine Pratt scenario, the linebacker of the Bengals. We've talked about him a bit since the beginning of free agency, and with the very top landing spot being the Indianapolis Colts with the Lou Anarumo connection, and the Colts badly needed a linebacker. They did a really good job in the draft, but they still badly need a linebacker. The Bengals and Jermaine Pratt kind of agreed that they're going to seek a trade. That was months ago. The Bengals drafted 2 linebackers. They're going to look to move on from Pratt, right? It seems to be pretty obvious. I think teams like the Colts are waiting for the Bengals to just cut him, but they feel they could trade him. There could be other teams interested in as well. He's a decent linebacker with experience. I thought a pick swap made some sense. I think his skill set maybe says a little bit more than that, but because it's pretty obvious. The Bengals they said they're looking to trade him. They drafted 2 other linebackers. They could use space, for a Trey Hendrickson deal. So it'd be pretty cheap. It could be a lone 7th. It could be a lone 6th. I thought a swap of picks made some sense. The Colts get Pratt and a 7th-round pick, and then boom, they got a starting linebacker that fits their defense and a 6th-round pick to the Cincinnati Bengals. Whether it's a trade or a cut in signing, I'm just still expecting for Pratt to find his way on a different team, and that team most likely being the Indianapolis Colts. Eldon Jenkins, offense lineman of the Green Bay Packers, and we just talked about him in a recent video of surprise trade candidates, and the more I talk about him, the more I think about it, it's a little more likely than a surprise candidate in my opinion. He's holding out right now. He wants a new deal. The Packers are putting him at center. He could play center. Obviously, he was a really good guard, but he's obviously very versatile. But he doesn't want to end up getting paid as a center. He doesn't want to get stuck getting valued as a center in the future because guards get paid more money, and he's a really solid guard. It makes a lot of sense, but the way he's getting paid right now, maybe it's a lot for the Green Bay Packers for a center where they plan on playing him, and they have other options that could fill in there. So it actually makes sense for both sides. It makes sense that Jenkins doesn't want to get forced as a center. He doesn't mind playing center, but get forced there and getting paid as a center right now and in the future. He wants to get paid like a guard because that's where he played at a high level as, and it makes sense for the Packers to not want to pay a center big-time money. So it's a trade that could happen. I could see several teams. We touched on multiple teams in that recent video for him, but the Cardinals make a lot of sense. The Cardinals dominated the draft, but they dominated it on defense. They still need offensive line help, and Jenkins makes a lot of sense as a left guard for the Arizona Cardinals so he can get paid like a guard, and then his versatility, being able to fill in at center or tackle. Remember, Jonah Williams got hurt for the Cardinals last year. I think is a bonus here for Arizona. So, and they could pay him what he's getting paid right now. If he needs an extension, needs a little bit of a raise this year. I think he gets played plenty enough in 2026. So we'll see what would happen, but it would make a lot of sense with the Arizona Cardinals, and the Packers get a 3rd-round pick. I thought about it a little. I could see a little bit more in a 3rd-round pick. I could see maybe a 6th tagged along with it because he's very good, very versatile. He's under contract for 2 more years. You may have to tweak that deal a little bit, but could end up being a 3rd-round pick. Maybe the Packers, maybe they do want to free that space because they're a little tight in the future. Maybe they want to free it and not pay a center big money. Maybe they want to pay that center. You remember when they let Lindsley walk quite a few years ago? He went to the Chargers. They don't want to pay that big amount of money to a center. It's a possibility, but Jenkins does bring a little bit more value to the Packers because he could play guard, could even fill in at tackle if they absolutely need him to. But a guy that I'm starting to think it's a little more realistic that he actually could be dealt. The Cardinals are my favorite landing spot, but again, I could see several other teams Ravens, Commanders stand out, maybe the Raiders, other teams that could use a guard. Now, we have talked about this Jalen Ramsey scenario in a somewhat recent trade video, but I felt like I had to include him in this. It's very fitting. It's trades that are realistic, that can happen at any second. Everyone's expecting it to happen. Maybe not necessarily with the Rams. There's some rumors about the Commanders, which may be a little surprising. They traded for Latimer last year. It wasn't that long ago. And they drafted Trey Amos to have Sainer still, but who knows? They could add him. But a lot of rumors about the Dallas Cowboys right now. Ramsey bought a house in Fort Worth, Texas. So people putting that connection together doesn't mean everything. All the time we hear players buy, a trade candidate buys a house, or a free agent even, in this spot. So that means he's going there. It almost never happens for some reason. But also some rumors that the Cowboys are interested. We don't know that level of interest, but they're interested. I don't know if it makes a ton of sense. They trade for Kyer Elam. Doesn't mean that to be their starter, but they traded for him. They have Diggs coming back from injury. Maybe they trade Diggs. Then it would make some sense, but it'd be hard to do. They have Deron Bland. They drafted Savone Revel, who I like a lot as long as he's healthy. Even Kalen Carson is a young, decent depth guy with some upside. So doesn't make a ton of sense. They just traded for George Pickens. But most of the rumors are siding with the Cowboys right now. And Schefter's reporting that there's a long list of teams. There's actually some significant interest, more than you think. So that makes the compensation a little tricky. But the Dolphins don't want to pay a portion of his salary, but they're almost going to have to. Teams aren't going to pay him the 20+ million that he's going to be. Teams just aren't going to do that. They can't do that. So they're going to have to pay a portion. And because the apparently significant interest, and the Dolphins paying a portion if they finally give in, that could really boost his value. It could be a 4th-round pick, but even if the Dolphins pay a portion of his deal, he's still going to be expensive. He's a veteran guy. He's still pretty damn good, but not as good as he was last time he was with the Rams. Do you really trade a 4th-round pick? I really value a 4th-round pick, but it's certainly possible. Could it be a 5th and something else? It's a little tricky. Does a team take on the full salary, and then it could end up being a 6th-round pick? Also, keep in mind, the Dolphins and Jalen Ramsey announced to the world that we're going to trade, the trade's going to happen. So that decreases the value a little bit as well. But an interesting situation that we're just kind of hoping ends sometime soon. But I still think the Rams could be that likely destination, a team that is really good, a contender that's really improving, but they could definitely use another corner. They could definitely use another linebacker as well, but then that really could give them that major boost, because they're right now, if you saw my playoff prediction video, I have them in the Super Bowl, so this could help them that much more. I feel like a team that just needs to make that roster as good as it could possibly be without killing your future. You be smart about it, they'll be smart. So one that could definitely happen, and maybe could be elsewhere, not the Rams, somewhere else. We'll see. And we've touched on this Kirk Cousins scenario in the past as well, but he did not report to not a surprise. He's not reporting to OTAs. That actually came out today. Not a surprise at all. And it's seeming less likely maybe that Rodgers ends up signing with the Steelers. It still could happen. So it just feels more and more likely that a Kirk Cousins to the Pittsburgh Steelers trade could definitely happen. It's tough to figure out compensation with Cousins as well. Teams want the Falcons to pay a portion of the salary. They don't want to do it, but I think they do end up paying a little bit. Maybe not a ton. It's still, people act like, he's too expensive, for a starting quarterback with experience for a team like the Steelers who need someone like that. He's really not that expensive, especially if the Falcons pay a little bit of portion of that deal. But yeah, what will you trade? I mean, there's some talk. This could be, if the Falcons pay a portion of the deal, that this could be a 3rd-round pick. But man, just thinking about that, a guy that's coming off a tough season. He did play pretty well earlier in the year, but had an upper body injury last year. He had the Achilles the year before. He's not getting any better. Doesn't mean he's declining like rapidly. I mean, I guess he could be. I still think he can play. I still think if he's on the Steelers, I think he can play. But a guy that is on top of all that is a backup and will be a backup. He has no interest of being there for the Falcons. Like, how much do you really give up a day 2 pick for that? That sounds crazy. A 4th, even if you put it that way, like what I just said, even seems a little crazy. But he's an experienced, solid, smart quarterback that would make the Steelers significantly better, actually. And they're desperate. So, even though the Falcons maybe lose some leverage where he's a backup, and they just get rid of him. There's gonna be a certain point where it's like just move on, right? But the Steelers are very desperate, and the Falcons know that. There's really no other teams that are gonna be that desperate. So we'll see. Another point on why the Steelers shouldn't overpay is, even if they trade for Cousins and even if he's solid for them, what's their plan? Look at the quarterback class next year. It looks pretty good. I think they're really looking, and they did not want to take a quarterback earlier, even early at all in this year's draft. They waited for Will Howard. They waited and took Will Howard later, obviously. My point is the Steelers are looking to find the quarterback of the future, whether they add Kirk Cousins or not. And that should be, maybe the next draft class, for an example. So do you really want to pay like a premium price here to get a guy that's really not your future? I know you're desperate for him right now. So a little bit of a tricky situation, but it just feels like this is going to happen unless Rodgers wakes up one day and goes, boom, I'll go to the Steelers. And maybe the Steelers prefer Cousins over Rodgers. I don't know about that, though, because they already tried to sign Rodgers. We'll see. But again, it just feels like this could happen. Do the Falcons pay a portion of the salary, and what is the compensation? Does a team like Steelers overpay for a guy that's a backup right now and will be this year? We'll see. But there you have it, some realistic trade scenarios. We had some of the surprise trade candidates with landing spots in a recent video. We can do more of those, some trades that we would just love to see happen, things like that. Going to start ranking some NFL players like we usually do as well. That's coming up. And then we'll preview the season. We've kind of been doing that a little bit as well. So join us for our off-season content. Like, subscribe to notifications on. It's going to do it. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.